Welcome AP Hug team. Welcome to another exciting lecture looking at our discussion of development. In this video lecture, we're going to be discussing key issue number 3. Where does the level of development vary by gender? Alright, before we dive into the key issue for today, I want to remind you that we are introducing different methods of note-taking that might work for you in your geo logbook. Our first video lecture, we introduced something known as the Cornell note method, which was a 2-column system, small column on the left and then a larger column on the right. In our last video lecture, we introduced an outline method. And in this video lecture, I would like you to perhaps consider trying something called 3-column notes. 3-column notes, you can see here's just a model on the screen. Usually on the far left column, we have a column that's set up for the headings as can be copied as questions or copying key terms. Usually in the center column, that's where you summarize. Now in this case, in this particular example, they're summarizing the different maps and pictures, and obviously in geography class, that's something we want to make sure that you understand of how we connect our different maps and utilize spatial thinking. And then finally, the last column in this case, write out answers to the questions and the definition of key terms. So this might be something that might work for you to organize not only your video lecture, but also consider trying this method when you're taking your notes from your actual textbook. Alright, before we dive into the key issue, I wanted to go ahead and introduce the topic with a video that's provided by the UN, which stands for United Nations. Gender equality is one of our UN development goals for sustainable development. So let's go ahead and have a look in terms of how they're going to present the issue. Alright, so with that in our mindset, let's go ahead and get started on today's discussion. So on the screen right now we have the slide Gender Inequality. We've been talking about levels of development, and primarily we've introduced the concept of a measurement known as HDI, which stands for the Human Development Index. Now there's several things that go factored into how to crunch that HDI number. We've introduced the discussion of economic indicators, which we look at GDP per capita, GNI. We've introduced social, looking at the education and literacy rates. And then we've also looked at demographic factors, looking at life expectancy, access to health care. But sometimes looking at those elements of HDI, necessarily it hides or masks that we still have major issues with our gender inequality. So I wanted you to think to yourself a couple questions on the screen. What does it mean in terms of inequality? And then perhaps you can even think about examples that we have here in the United States, perhaps examples we have in our own community, and then how we see gender inequality around the world. The video introduced there are several things that women combat in our world today. Number one being violence and discrimination against women. lack of education. Many places around the world, females are not allowed to have the same access to education and go to school like we see boys and their counterparts. A big issue for females is the issue of child marriage. So many different parts of our developing, or what we classify as the LDCs parts of the world, young girls are married off relatively young, and there's a major uproar in terms of trying to make sure that these girls give a chance to have an education, a career, and actually choose their life plan. One of the websites that are featured on the haiku page, it's titled Girls Not Brides, so I suggest you check it out. In the video clip, they also addressed the concept of unpaid. Most females around the world, they were responsible for unpaid work, and they're more in the domestic realm. That really deprives them of achieving the same economic opportunities that men have. Big issue for women's rights, of course, is access to universal health care and reproductive rights. And then also in this section, it deals with inequality, equal wages for equal work. We do see a significant wage gap between men and women, roughly about, I believe it's 70 or 80 cents per dollar that every dollar a man makes. And then also in this section, it has to do with inequality of leadership. So gender equality is one of the major sustainable development goals that's set forth by the United Nations. And the goal is to achieve gender equality for all the sustainable goals is by the year 2030. All right, in key issue number 3, it introduces 2 measures, ways to measure gender inequality. The first one is referred to the Gender Development Index, or the GDI, and the second one is the Gender Empowerment Measure. I know what you're thinking. Great, more acronyms I need to memorize, but these will definitely serve us well in trying to understand where we see gender inequality around the world. All right, the first one to take a look at is known as the GDI. And the GDI compares the level of development of women of that with both sexes. Now the GDI is pretty easy to remember because it's very similar to our discussion of the HDI index. It kind of goes into 3 main categories. The first one is economic factors, and I just crunched the numbers, folks. I just cross-referenced. Currently, right now, women earn 78 cents per dollar. And it's believed if we are going at that same rate, it won't be until the year 2058 that women will actually be earning the same amount as men, which is crazy to think about. It also goes back to what type of work women are responsible for. So in our later units, for example, in agriculture, we look at parts of Northern Africa where women hold it's barely 1 in 5 jobs outside of the realm of domestic or in agriculture. So definitely that's a huge factor in terms of their income. Another element that we look for the GDI is social. So how many females are enrolled in school and how many years of expected education. And the last one is demographic factors, looking at the life expectancy of females. Alright, so I just pulled up the United Nations Human Development Reports, and you can see right here in Table 4 has a copy of the Gender Development Index, or the GDI. So this is a ranking system. Again, just like with our HDI index, a perfect score in A+ would be a 1. So we can see the highest score on this list would be Norway. Norway also has a very high HDI, very high on the GDI index. You can see several other European countries are also in the top 10. You can see Germany, we can see Ireland. The United States, however, is at the bottom end of the top 10 list, right here on the screen. But you can see, just like we have up here at the top, we have the GDI. It compares it to the HDI, life expectancy at birth, expected years of schooling, the mean of the years of school earning. And then again, we're looking at the gross national income, which is per capita. All right, to help us understand GDI, I pulled a few maps. These maps are featured in your textbook. However, I know we're still working with our black and white copies. So if you look at the screen, you can see color. Look at the GDI, but in this map, it's looking at the GII, which is the Gender Inequality Index. So again, looking at the different shading on the screen, you can definitely see a darker color would be indicate below, which would be a lower sense of inequality versus the lighter shades. So if we were going to use our WOQI for levels of spatial analysis, we can definitely see there's certain areas around the world, and if we were using GIS, perhaps we could even look at matching these maps with our Human Development Index. So you can see definitely eye-catching observations. Why very light shade in the country of, or I should say, excuse me, the continent of Africa. You can also see lighter shades around parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. So there's definitely, again, not as much dark as you would hope. United States and the North America has a dark shade. We also see Europe featured, which again on this particular map is below a 0.30. Alright, another map to take a look at on the screen. This one is the ratio to female to male rates of secondary education. Again, we're looking for primarily darker shades to indicate that there is a good ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio. Definitely in the United States, we see that women have access to secondary education. We also see them achieving levels of higher education. However, one could definitely say, even though the education level in some of these places is presumed that is equal access, women are not receiving the same opportunity after in the job market. Women aren't necessarily being tracked into the more of the STEM type of majors and fields, which includes more of the computer and science and technology. But again, we definitely see the lighter shades on this map to understand where the inequality is occurring in education. And then finally, this last map is for us to look at, and this one is the deaths of women per 100,000 live births. So definitely we take for granted the access to medical care. We can definitely see on the darker portions of the map where women are not having access to proper medical care when it comes to their discussion of their reproductive rights, or trying to make sure they have access to prenatal care around the world. It's quite alarming, folks, that this is something that is definitely widespread and very rampant in our world today. It's simply, again, just getting access to basic medical care and medicine that women so desperately need around the world. All right, and then finally today I wanted to go ahead and introduce the last measurement that's featured in key issue number 3, which is the GEM. The GEM compares the ability of women and men to participate in economic and political decision making. How do we calculate the GEM? On the screen, we look at two main factors: economic, so the number of professional and technical jobs held by women, and that also includes managing people. For many cases that we see women in the workplace, but they're not necessarily responsible for the decisions that are being made. And then political, the number of government positions held by females. Currently, we have several countries around the world, I believe it's upwards of 20, that have female heads of states. Again, very progressive for the United States this year, that we have for the first time. We have nominated for our major political parties. We have Hillary Clinton, that has the potential to be the first female president of the United States, so we will wait and see what transpires. But the GEM is something, again, how much economic and political decision making is being taken place by the females in that particular country.
You see this massive gap emerging.
We're shortchanging voices that are urgently needed in public forums from ever getting to the table.
If people knew that Cuba, China, Iraq, and Afghanistan have more women in government than the United States of America, that would get some people upset.
No wonder we are in such trouble in this country. We've been choosing our national leadership from 6% of the country. As the most powerful country in the world, if you're not standing for the right values and the right principles, that's a loss for the world.
You can't be what you can't see.
Growing up, there was nobody who looked like me on television, so I never dreamed that I could be on television.
To see